Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and on tonight's show, as always, we are joined by my lovely two co-hosts, Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm lovely all of a sudden.
You are,
I
you're
like that.
lovely. Yeah, you are, you're lovely, Richard.
Lovely on this lovely day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the sun's out and the sky's blue.
Very true. That's a song.
Yes. And that rhymes as well.
Anyway.
Yeah, anyway, we are carrying on from last week's subject on types of hauntings, and tonight we're going to be looking more at poltergeists. Now, we are joined in the studio by an author and researcher of paranormal poltergeists, John Frazer. Hello, John.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. Yeah, totally. It's so how are you coping in the lockdown?
Funnily enough, apart from doing a bit of paranormal research, I've been writing a bit of poetry, just like you were there.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay.
I love the way, Paul, you really underplayed John's talents. It's like,
you mean my poetic talents?
I know.
Don't want to give too much away too soon.
Oh, right. Okay.
You know, we could build up for it through the show, you know, and, you know, don't want to get it all over and done with in the first 5 minutes, do we, you know?
We'll get this locomotive
some
rolling.
Author, some researcher, or, you know, poltergeist.
Well, I'm sorry, I couldn't get any party poppers from the local shop. They're totally sold out, you know.
We can honestly say that John is an authority on the subject of poltergeist as well as cyclical phenomena in general. So we got him on because he hopefully will bring a lot more sense to the topic that we started on last week. And also, we were putting things in boxes. We got our boxes out, didn't we, guys, last week?
We did.
Yes.
It took me ages to sort them boxes out and put them back.
But cyclical phenomena, as we ended up coming to the conclusion of, is not so easy sometimes to put into a box. And I think John is one of those people that will agree with that point, wouldn't you say, John?
Maybe, maybe not. We may find over the course of this discussion that I think psychic phenomena should possibly be put into one big box.
Ooh.
Oh dear.
One big box. We do love a big box.
I'm not carrying that around.
No.
Now, John, you are on the council of the Society of Psychical Research, otherwise known as the SPR, everybody. And you are also on the council of the Ghost Club, am I right?
No, I used to be on the council of the Ghost Club as Vice Chair of Investigations, but I'm still a member of the Ghost Club, but I'm no longer on the council. I think you can be on too many bodies.
Ah, and, well, your credentials are absolutely phenomenal. Can you tell us, right, because you've been in this business quite a long time with cyclical phenomena, haven't you?
Yes, I suppose I have, if you want to put it like that.
Quite a few years, everybody.
Very modest.
Not giving
you could say
away.
you could say I've crisscrossed 2 millenniums. That's quite easy to do these days.
It goes so quick, doesn't it, John?
I know, one millennium to the other and then next.
So we've actually got you on because you've got a new book that's due to be released in July regarding poltergeist. So you've really looked into this particular topic recently. This is your most recent project, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So where did you start? When you first started your book, where did you start with your opinion of poltergeist when you first started? And did that change whilst writing the book?
I actually didn't have... There's 10 chapters in the book and I didn't have a chapter 10. I started in the proviso that there was a lot to be said about poltergeist phenomena that possibly hadn't been put down for at least a couple of decades, maybe even as far as Colin Wilson's book in the 1980s. But when I actually started writing it and sort of researching it from the point of an author, I totally did not have a have a conclusion. And it was quite interesting the way, as I started to write, I possibly came to a conclusion in the end. No, I mean, I've always thought of poltergeist as being more of a syndrome than a thing. I mean, basically, from want of putting it another way, a poltergeist is all the fun, exciting parts of a haunting. It's all the noisy bits, the movement of objects is given a different name. Now, the question is it really a different phenomena? Or are they two separate things? Have we got one box or have we got lots of little boxes?
Now there's a phenomena, isn't it, in itself? It's like you can't really break it down and categorise apart from the type of phenomena that happens. So like levitation or moving objects or noisy raps. And all of this does come under the poltergeist heading, doesn't it?
That all comes under the poltergeist heading. But what starts to make it interesting is Alan Gould and Tony Cornell wrote a previous book about poltergeists in 1979, imaginally called Poltergeists. They added an S to the title, I didn't, in which they categorised 500 cases throughout history, far more than about my 25, but still. And they actually found that in 29% of poltergeist cases, there was ghostly visual phenomena, and in 26% there was ghostly audio phenomena. So you add a bit of a crisscross maybe, and you've probably already got about 40% plus of cases in which there's phenomena that you would think of as being ghosts. Now, why would that be? That's the question. If they are two separate things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because you often sort of like look at poltergeist sort of cases, and they seem to be so sort of separate. You know, sort of you talk to anyone today, and they'll say, well, the general consensus of opinion is they are totally separate from sort of ghosts and hauntings. But from your sort of like, but you're saying that this may not be the case.
Yeah, I'm saying not only that it may not be the case, but the interesting thing is when I started looking at all the cases I had investigated, such as phantom black dogs and what have you.
Talking of the black dog, I've got one.
Yeah, yes, we just been interrupted.
That's why I brought it up.
Just popped in to say hello.
Shut up. Sorry, everybody. Carry on, John.
Go on, sorry. Carry on.
Now that he's stopped, I've totally forgotten about phantom black dogs. But seriously, of all the non poltergeist ghost cases, once I started thinking about them and thinking about the ones I'd researched in the past, by far the vast majority, or possibly even all of them, were sort of those wonderful, whimsical tales that nobody had seen anything in 50 years and were probably based on a bit of folklore and probably never even happened. I'll give you one little example. For example, there's a place called Igtham, Merton, Kent, that's supposed to be haunted by a lady called Dame Dorothy Selby, who got bricked up during the Gunpowder Plot because she gave away the Catholics. But her mausoleum is actually in the church down the road. She didn't get bricked up there. She got buried in the church 40 years later. So not only have you got a total lack of sightings for about 100 years in that case, you've actually got a ghost that couldn't possibly exist. And once you look at the sort of ghosts that don't have a poltergeist element, I actually started to find that nearly all of them were that type. Take away all the lovely whimsical tales, Glam's Castle, etc., and you really are, the modern ongoing ghostly cases almost always have a poltergeist element.
So when you look at these, you like you said, you take away the romanticised story of a ghost story, and you actually break it down. You're looking at actual testimony from witnesses, not looking at the historical perspective of it.
Yeah, definitely. If you're going to try to make a good case for a ghost story by itself, the only way of doing it is by multiple witness testimony, to be honest. There's a colleague of mine in the Ghost Club, Alan Murdy, who's a barrister, who's made a great point of talking about what he calls similar fact evidence, that if enough people see the same thing, it's enough to maybe put somebody away for a crime, but strangely, it's not enough to even make some scientists think there might be something strange going on out there with regards to ghosts. So definitely with regards to phantoms and apparitions, the only way to make a case for them would be to basically interview enough people, and if they all see the same thing, you've got something interesting going on. But with the romantic cases, once you start talking to people, they've rarely seen anything in the last 30 years. And these sort of cases that stand by themselves are probably just a bit of fun, to be honest.
Or they were something that happened just like on a one-off occurrence.
It could be that as well. I tend to think ghosts probably do have a sell-by date, if you know what I mean. If we were doing a stone tape theory, the tape would fade, and so on. But in a lot of cases, there probably could be old smugglers' tales, and just hearsay. There was a chap, for example, that wrote a lot of. I've forgotten his name. He wrote a lot about a place called Ham House that's supposed to be particularly haunted, but the actual all the facts behind his ghost stories have been shown to be rather generously stretched, let's put it. And there are a lot of, most of your really good old-fashioned castles and traditional ghost stories without a poltergeist element do boil down to being quite a lot of whimsy.
The poltergeist phenomenon in itself is actually quite sensationalized a lot of times. When you read accounts, it seems so fantastical, the phenomena that seems to occur around them, and it always gets brought back to that it's got to be a pubescent child in the house. But when I read I've read Colin Wilson's book from the 1970s or 70s, 80s, that you have gone on from. This is almost like an extension of with your book, isn't it? Because you've called it basically the same, except a new look at it. The subtitle is A New Study in Destructive Haunting, isn't it?
There is a coincidental similarity in the title, yes. And I believe Colin Wilson's first edition only had including the Black Monk of Pontefract, and my first edition, or first of I don't know how many, has including the Cage Witches prison at St. Joseph's. So yes, there is a coincidence. No, it's not just a question of basking in Wilson's glory in any way, though. I do actually pick up on quite a few of Colin Wilson's cases and his conclusions, and especially with the Black Monk of Pontefract, possibly challenge his conclusions. I also think, possibly with one exception in the 90s, there has been a real shortage of poltergeist books written about the genre as opposed to particular poltergeists in the last few decades. So I thought it was a good way to pick up on Wilson's findings and see how much they equated to the modern world.
Oh no, I totally agree. There has definitely been a lack of an in-depth look at this particular phenomena, and it is something that it's like the ultimate. It's like the grail of all paranormal. If you could get your hands on a real live and kicking poltergeist case like the Enfield haunting, or the Pontefract case, that would be great, wouldn't it? But we don't seem to get those. Or is it that we don't get them, or they just tend to peter out before we get there? Or is it because they go to the ghost hunting community now and not to the research bodies? What do you think on that?
Well, I'm actually doing a lecture on Saturday entitled "A Poltergeist Surveyor," because that seems to be the assumption. Yes, certainly there used to be like about 7 or 8 paranormal research organisations. Now I think somebody counted 1,200 in 2006, so it could be even more now. Most Haunted has certainly got a lot of people interested. So, and most paranormal organisations do behave a bit like the Monty Python sketch, the People's Front of Judea and the Judeans People Front, and don't tend to talk with each other and share their findings. So there are likely a lot more poltergeist cases out there than we'd possibly realise. I would say every genuine haunting, or most genuine hauntings, probably do have a poltergeist element. Now, where it gets interesting is you kind of think that poltergeists are kind of something that happen in England, possibly Australia, not USA. They seem to kind of be a English-speaking Western European, USA kind of thing, and you kind of think, why aren't they happening elsewhere if it's such a common phenomena? But I've actually been to Transylvania 7 times, just because I quite like the place.
Oh, you can't say it like that. You have to go to Transylvania.
Yes.
Sorry, carry on. You've been to
Sounds
Transylvania.
interesting.
Hang on, I'll give it a go. Transylvania.
Very good.
I was trying to put it in like casual, I went to Croydon a couple of times and what have you. But actually, I actually made quite good contact with some Romanian folklorists and academics to some extent. And what I've gradually discovered is what comes out of Romania as vampires, and has been made rather colourful by us, thanks to Bram Stoker and what have you, is just another sort of terminology for a noisy, mischievous entity that throws things around and makes a lot of noise. In effect, you have vampire poltergeists, which sounds strange, but it's just people tend to put a cultural identity in things they don't understand. So in Romania, they might call them vampires. In Colombia, there's quite a lot of cases where they would call them duende, which is a Latin American phrase that approximates to goblins. And then you've got all the difficulty because most paranormal investigators wouldn't want to go goblin hunting. Because there
is a resurgence of that at the moment, isn't there, with Elia?
Yes.
But you see what I'm saying? It's just an entirely... people have different ways of describing these this kind of strange syndrome where suddenly there's inexplicable noises, rappings, pools of water, etc., etc. And it does actually seem to be quite a worldwide phenomena. So, which makes me think it's even less rare than we possibly thought.
It's going back to the work, which your book sort of follows on from, sort of like the work of, say, Wilson, and perhaps you can even include Playfair in that. I mean, is there anything sort of new that's sort of been found out about supposed poltergeist activity, which perhaps these earlier authors would not have known about?
Definitely, yes. One of the reasons I kind of thought probably somebody needed to put pen to paper. I mean, one main example is one of my SPR colleagues called Barry Colvin. About 15 years ago, started to experiment with all the tapes he could get hold of poltergeist cases, including Enfield, I think Sochi, and a good few others. He might have got a couple from Latin America, I think from Guy Playfair. And he noticed that whilst when I rap the table with my knuckle like this, like that, that was a table. And that was definitely my knuckle, because it hurt a little bit. But if you're listening to it acoustically, it hits peak resonance very quickly, as you'd expect, and then slowly echoes down to nothing. However, when Colvin put most of these tapes and analysed them, he actually found it was a gradual increase to the peak of the sound envelope, as if the sound was resonating out of the table rather than being pushed upon it by a knuckle. Now, there's quite a few provisos in that, which I obviously explained in the book, and we did a little bit of playing around with that technique in one particular case as well. But that is certainly a possible way forward and a possibility to explore, because obviously, if Colvin is correct, and it does have a different sound envelope, that is difficult to repeat. It is a point in the right direction for poltergeist being an unexplained phenomena, and is also a very good way, if it was properly established, of getting rid of fake raps.
I find that actually fascinating. Yeah, that's quite blown me away. That, I mean, have sort of like I know the SPR do have probably the library of the poltergeist tapes, and have these actually been sort of studied for this sort of phenomena that has been?
Yeah, I mean, Colvin used the Enfield tapes as part of his 7 or 8 examples he managed to get hold of. We do have our librarian does have the Enfield tapes. He's actually written a book based on the more interesting bits of the transcripts that was published just last year, which is, funnily enough, called the Enfield tapes. Easy title to remember, and it says what's on the. That's Melvin Willing. So if anyone wants to really find a sort of chapter and verse of what happened in what order at Enfield, that's definitely to be recommended. But yes, I mean, Colvin tested the Enfield tapes, which are old reel-to-reel tapes. So I mean, there is a possibility they may or may not have got slightly. He obviously had to change the format, and sound technicians can debate whether or not that would have made an impact or not. But they've been tested, and they came out with the acoustic sound gradually increasing rather than hitting a peak immediately. So as far as that goes, they passed the test. As I say, there's a few provisos, but it's definitely that's worth following up on. I mean, possibly the other interesting thing is I had a colleague in the SPR called Mary Rose Barrington, who sadly passed away a couple of months ago. She joined in 1957, which is definitely before my time, and believe it or not, joined the council in 1962 until basically no. But she specialised in a theory which she categorised as jots. Jots being a sort of shorthand way of saying just one of those things.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
It's just one of those things.
Yes, one of those things.
I think that's a coverall term for anything in the paranormal, isn't it?
But she does define her jots. Now, have you guys ever had just one of those things when you put something down, set of keys, what have you, in a place, and then they totally disappear, and they either turn up somewhere stupid, or 3 weeks later turn up in exactly the same place, even though you're sure you searched it tons of times, or
all the time. I just put it down to me being an idiot,
and you kind of shrug your shoulder and think, oh, that's just one of those things.
I think we can all sort of say yes, we do. Everyone does.
I've got a couple of examples that I put in the book that are quite amusing, actually. But that is actually a phenomena that is very common in the early stages of a poltergeist case. I mean, for example, in the research I was doing on the cage, you had the owner of the cage, Vanessa Mitchell, used to her cousin used to come round to tidy up the flat, very generous. Tidy up the house when nobody was in, and would spontaneously find things moving, cushions moving off of without her seeing them, cushions being on the settee, and then suddenly neatly being piled up on one side or something like that. So if it's an early sign of a poltergeist case, and there's lots of instances of it happening during poltergeist cases, could it not also possibly be that what we're experiencing when these impossible things happen, you leave your keys in the drawer and then suddenly they're not in the drawer, it's just a possibility they're minor poltergeist incidents?
Oh, that makes me feel a lot better and not make me feel like I'm going balmy. I'm going to just put it down to a poltergeist activity from now on.
I mean, I've been to the cage and done my own investigation, but it was really flat and nothing happened at all the whole night we was there. So is this case sort of ongoing, or has it been concluded already?
The cage is hopefully concluded, because I believe somebody is buying the house that has no interest in the paranormal, and after 10 years I think the owner wants to get rid of it, and it's been quite a journey, and so hopefully it's concluded, at least in that particular chapter. I mean, I've been in the cage a couple of times and absolutely nothing has happened to me. I don't tend to get. I'm about as psychic as a brick anyway, but maybe that's unfair on bricks. I don't know. But what I did with the cage, more than actually setting up the equipment to spend the night there or anything like that, I actually got free rein to interview nearly anybody that had been involved with the case, including a independent TV producer who was there in a private capacity, not to make a TV program, and so on. And now, obviously, there's kind of two lines of witnesses for what's been happening in the cage. There was people Vanessa lived with and her friends and family and so on. Obviously, her cousin that I've mentioned earlier. And then there was lots of paranormal groups that came in, took their own notes and disappeared. And quite interestingly, of the paranormal groups I contacted that had experienced interesting things, there was actually quite a commonality into what they had experienced, which was, again, it comes back to Alan Murdy's similar fact evidence. If you're trying to prove something, it's far better having 5 people seeing the same thing. It included up to about 5 incidents of poltergeist scratchings. Definitely all kinds of activity on the staircase, where there had actually been a recorded suicide in the not too distant past, and various other hot spots, one of the bedrooms. It also had the capacity for, how does one put it, totally freaking people out in the way probably over and beyond the normal psychology of a haunted house. I mean, few people thought they were possessed. One person was absolutely genuinely said they were suicidal after staying there. It's quite interesting. I did a bit of research. It was actually through Poltergeist book by Gold and Connell. There are 500 cases, and I found a case that was virtually like The Cage. There had been a suicide a few months before, and then a lot of doors opening and slamming, which was very prevalent in The Cage. And the interesting thing about this case from Victorian times in Brighton was that they had 3 separate families living there, that the SPR had recorded all 3 of them, and they all experienced very similar things. So you kind of put all that together, and I mean, I never say a place is, in inverted commas, haunted or not haunted, which but there is definitely some unexplained things happening in The Cage, and the timeline also fits as well. I mean, obviously, The Cage has been a well-publicized place, which obviously puts makes some people a little bit suspicious for, for whatever reasons. But the actual timeline, Vanessa Mitchell moved in there in I think 2005, spent 4 years there. Was house sharing for a time with people who also accredited to there being phenomena, and spent another year there afterwards until she couldn't stand it any longer. If somebody had just been trying to, play games in an old house, that would not have been the timeline. It wouldn't have made any sense at all. It wasn't even. I mean, it's not even. I mean, it's got a little plaque about the witches outside, but it's a 2 up, 2 down place. It's not the sort of place you would think would necessarily be the best place to, to have paranormal investigations in.
It's very small, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very. Yeah. It's not the when you actually look at the timeline, it does not have anything of publicity stunt in it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Or setting out for that purpose. Obviously, it's been well publicised along the way, but so that's a very important point.
There is always the human factor, though, isn't there, with poltergeist? So, I appreciate your point when you say, you've got to look at, witness testimony and people that experience, but there's always the human factor with cyclical phenomena. So you can't ever take that out. So is it created by a manifestation from an internal process, do you think?
Ooh, now that's chapter 10. I didn't.
She's gone straight to the spoiler. We want the spoiler.
Sorry. We'll save that question then to the end.
When I started writing the book, I didn't have a definite conclusion. Let's play around with chapter 10. I'm sure people will want to know how we got there. Now, Colin Wilson. One of the reasons I kind of slightly follows up on Colin Wilson's work is you've read Poltergeist, haven't you? Mm-hmm. I believe.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you or your listeners have also read the occult and mysteries and books like that.
I've started on occult, and I'm actually reading Supernatural at the moment.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I mean, Colin Wilson is, I think he calls himself a existentialist philosopher rather than paranormal investigator or what have you. I mean, he's, I mean, I used to, I mean, I still, I think he's a fantastic read. I mean, but his entire 57 books is all about the power of the inner mind. I mean, he talks in The Occult about this hidden thing called Faculty X inside ourselves that that if only we could set free, then we'd kind of all be sort of supermen or women or what have you. And he keeps that up during mysteries. And then he starts Poltergeist along the same lines.
Yeah.
And then halfway through, he totally flips. Soon as he gets to that Black Monk of Pontefract, who, for some strange reason, haunts a 1950s council house.
Yep.
So
I've researched that one quite extensively, that particular case, and it
we'll
just...
talk about it in a minute. So if I let's look notes up. Actually, no, that's but he suddenly flips his theory. I think based on the kind of notion that whose subconscious would kind of pull themselves up the stairs, because Diane Pritchard at one point got pulled up by the stairs, albeit in half light, but apparently she was, and that one incident apparently flipped Colin Wilson's theory. And I spend a lot of time trying to work out whether he flipped the right way or not. I tend to think he possibly didn't. He spends about 2,500 pages writing about the power of the mind, and on one incident suddenly changes his own mind. I think that was possibly a Colin Wilson off day. I mean,
Can I just mention something on that point? Because I thought that too when I was reading it. But then he does reference a time where he met Guy Leon Playfair and they were discussing the poltergeist phenomena. Now, Guy Leon Playfair's perspective was that we put out like a ball of energy and an entity of some form comes along, plays with it, and that's what creates the energy for the entity to create the phenomena. Correct?
Correct. Spot on.
And I wondered if he flipped at that point because of his conversation with Guy.
Quite possibly. Guy's a very intelligent, very persuasive guy. That came out, you know what I mean. But you've got this ball of energy. Now, I know Guy actually played with quite a few ideas in this time, and he probably wasn't quite sure in the end himself, as any good researcher shouldn't be. But exploring this ball of energy theory, so you've got the ball of energy, that's fine, and then you've got this entity that plays with the ball of energy. Guy at that point didn't actually think it was something through the afterlife. He actually started talking about imps and things like that. And I mean, we can use interesting terminology, but at the end of the day, it's a bit like saying we don't really know what's playing with that ball of energy. So it isn't an impossible theory, but it's not a theory that desperately appeals to me, because it's kind of just using terminology that, you know, I mean, doesn't really get to grips with where we are. It's kind of adding something as well. Guy didn't strictly then. He wasn't strictly speaking about an afterlife theory, and not just an afterlife theory. He was actually talking about some kind of element. I think he used the word elementals actually. Yeah. And it's not that wouldn't be my favourite theory. We are all just theorising. I think any good paranormal researcher that thinks he or she has absolutely got the answer to it is absolutely deluding himself. So I could be totally wrong, but I would tend to think that, I mean, the thing about Poltergeist, and if we go back to the Black Monk, now they are the most boring entities you could possibly think of having a pint in the pub with.
I'll have to bear that in mind. Yeah.
Especially a haunted. Now, if you, I'm having a bit of fun there, but if you think about it, Black Monk spent 9 months chucking things around, making no attempt to communicate who he was. It was a little bit of speculation that turned him into a monk, which we might talk about later. But he basically just behaved like a 2-year-old with tantrums. Now, in the Andover case, where they actually had communicative rapping, they never got past trying to predict next week's football results. And they didn't even get that right most of the time. So, I mean, if I was a past life, if I was a former life entity, I mean, to be honest, I'd want to do something a little bit more interesting than that. If I was there for a reason, I'd have a message to give. And I mean, there's no real Enfield, with being the possible exception. There is no real history of Poltergeist doing anything interesting from a knowledgeable point of sense. Very interesting from a paranormal point of sense, and chucking things around and what have you. But no, they do not behave like they have mature, rational intelligence.
Would you sort of put that down? You talked about a guy sort of talking about these, his sort of theory was heading towards perhaps sort of imps or
elementals, I think. He actually used.
Yeah. Would that sort of put, sort of a trickster element within the poltergeist phenomenon?
If it was elementals, from what we understand elementals to be, they certainly would be consistent with being a trickster, because when we think about elementals, we think about mischievous sprites, goblins, fairies, and so on. But it then starts to become an unfortunate terminology, because then unless we're in Latin America, in which case they take us seriously, it's would probably best to find a better word for it. But yeah, certainly if there was such a thing as a disembodied, never been human entity that floated in the upper ether, there does seem to be a theory that they are rather mischievous. So that would certainly fit the evidence.
Yeah, so could it not be going back to that theory that they play with the energy? If we flipped that and said that it was our energy interfering or mixing in with theirs for like their behaviour, could that not also explain why they would communicate with rappings or tricksters? I mean, for me, because I do like to go on investigations and enjoy them, and I'm sort of a jokey type of person anyway, so I've got that influence. So could I not be having an effect on the poltergeist to be that trickster, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, the afterlife. I mean, the afterlife theory is, or even the imp theory is not absolutely logically impossible or logically inconsistent with the phenomena. It just strikes me as not being the one that fits the jigsaw puzzle the best.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of people would disagree with me, and other skeptics would even say that it's all just. Well, that's the fun thing with poltergeists. They would actually have to say it's all just human tricksters, because you can't put it down to psychology, because when something moves, either somebody's playing games or something very profound is happening. But I'm not. I'm not coming to any absolute firm, set in stone conclusions. But when I kind of studied cases, even cases that were supposed to prove the afterlife, it just kind of seemed to fit into subconscious emotional energy, possibly chucked in with a bit of strange electrical charges. Quite a lot of cases possibly happen on fault lines, and so on. It was more a bundle of human energy, a bundle of natural energy, all kinds of chucked into one. I mean, there's been quite a few cases when there's been serious electrical faults in houses as well.
Oh, I was wondering. Sorry, Richard. I was wondering, have there been any cases of a person having conscious telekinesis?
Well, there's millions of well, not millions. Sorry, there's plenty of cases of conscious PK. Assuming it wasn't Ford, I mean, I'm not saying it was. I mean, but they would tend to call themselves physical mediums or and what have you. I mean, I spend a good half a chapter talking about the Schneider brothers and some of the better mediums from the first half of the 20th century. I mean, there were some particularly shady ones that got caught with ridiculous photographs of, ectoplasm that and so on. But Schneider brothers were actually one of the better cases, and they were quite thoroughly tested by Harry Price, and in fact they ended up being tested by just about everybody that wanted to do it in Europe. And they, I'm not going to say they were genuine or not, but they certainly claimed to have PK powers and certainly demonstrated and convinced some. So I mean, there's plenty of. That's why I was talking about one box, because you can start to fit mediumistic abilities into that box, certainly physical mediumistic abilities. I mean, if you've got people that can move objects consciously, and if objects are then moved without rational explanation when there's somebody in a house under emotional stress, it kind of strikes me that the first thing to consider is whether they've got the same ability as the people that do it consciously but don't realise they're doing it.
That's kind of where I was going with it. It's, whether that's born from trauma or, because there's that accusation that's put out there. It's, a child that's going through puberty, that's going through traumatic, episodes, that tends to be where poltergeist activity happens. But it's not. I mean, you've just talked about the cage, and you've got, a grown woman in there with grown people around her, but then she did have a child, so maybe she was going through some form of trauma. I don't know. It's a very strange one, isn't it?
It's more to do with the I think with the trigger event, and puberty is one hell of a trigger event. But for example, everybody the people that lived in the cage and the people that lived in that house in Brighton were all aware of the suicide, and being aware that somebody died there may be seen as a trigger event. There's a famous case in Germany. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. I'm sure somebody can fill me in. Where a 19-year-old lady had just had her engagement broken off, and the office where she walked in started having all kinds of, quite literally, she could nearly put the lights on, and objects started to move just after her engagement got called off. And when you start to look at most cases, there is actually some kind of trigger event. It can even be, I mean, moving into a house, for example, is actually a very stressful event in itself. So these things do tend to happen when there's a change of ownership sometimes. So if I certainly wouldn't say it's definitely just triggered by girls and boys of a certain age, but it could well be that is a major trigger event. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely, because there are, like you say, moving house is classed as, this is from a normal perspective, even from a financial perspective, they'll talk about emotional trauma in regards to moving house or bankruptcy or, things like that. They'll look at those things as trigger emotional stress triggers. And if we then take that into the paranormal, you've got to broaden your horizons of what would be a trauma event, haven't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a case. I think I mentioned in the book. Written up. No, it's not a case I investigated. It's an American case, but very well written up by a chap called Stanford Betty. Betty, yeah. Called the Cairn City Poltergeist, which he thought tended to help explain the afterlife theory. But when I looked at, the good thing about this case is he copiously put in all the details. When you actually looked at the details, somebody had just moved into a dead person's, somebody had died, and the other lady had moved into the house with all the person's furniture in it, exactly as it was before she left. And there was various other stress factors as well. And it could well be that was the trigger event. You kind of feel like you're living in somebody else's home.
Mm.
Going back to vampires, did I tell you I'd been 7 times in Transylvania? No, I did, I think.
Only 7.
But going back to vampires, and this is not me, but there's a chap called Richard Sugg, who's a lecturer at Durham University, who actually has a theory that these vampire cases weren't only described as vampire cases, but actually triggered off by the fear of vampires after somebody died, because there was a vampire folklore tradition over there, obviously. Now, in effect, the fear of a paranormal entity could possibly have been causing psychic energy and, in effect, paranormal activity. And when you look at the Philip experiment, you've heard of the Philip experiment?
Oh yes.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Just in case anyone.
The Philip experiment.
Yeah. Just in case anyone hasn't out there, it's basically a Canadian group started off trying to create a ghost by giving it a false identity of a cavalier, etc. And they were actually trying to create a ghost, but they actually created poltergeist phenomena in the end. And when you start to look at the Philip experiment, it's quite possible that an expectation that something is going to happen could possibly trigger off the powers in our mind.
Well, this is what, going back to the Black Monk of Pontefract, this is kind of where I kind of got to. I was wondering whether or not the paranormal groups going in there are the ones creating the activity now, rather than it being the old case, because of the belief in the old case.
It could well be. You were saying that you'd done some research on the Black Monk. I'd be fascinated, actually, if you'd tell me a little bit about what you found out.
Yeah, I found out quite a lot, really, in regards to my disbelief in the haunting originally, to be fair.
Okay.
It's a conversation for another time, I feel. But no,
that's interesting. When you say your disbelief in the haunting, because we've got about 2/3 of chapter 7 about it, actually. So
I'll have to read it. Yeah, definitely.
But I mean, what was the bit about the haunting that you found quite dubious? Or
I think the account in the book, the Colin Wilson's book, the original, because it was in 2 sections, wasn't it? You had one in it only lasted for a few months. in the first. That you could get quite a good timeline of when things were happening and whatnot. The second part, a couple of years later, when it reoccurred, it was very fantastical. It was very almost anecdotal. Do you remember when this happened? And there wasn't a timeline. It fell apart at that point. So I'm not saying events didn't happen that were strange at that time. I don't think that they're now. I think that it is more of a belief in the original story that's creating that for paranormal teams when they go in there, depending on the team. I think there was a certain amount of phenomena that occurred that was put down to the poltergeist that could have a natural explanation. I certainly don't think the history backs up the black monk theory at all. There were certain factors that are banded around in the paranormal field that I find it takes my logical and rational mind to question it very severely. But I haven't actually been there. I will put that proviso out. I haven't actually been to that house, whereas Paul has, haven't you?
Yeah, I don't think you're missing too much, to be fair. No, to be honest, I didn't get anything. We did capture something that I can't explain, but the other investigators that was with us, they claim that it's just something to do with the light, but I'm not too sure. Mm-hmm. So it would be nice to have someone's second opinion on it, but it's just a case of getting that footage and getting it released, because the other guy that I was working with didn't want to put it out there, basically. So it's sort of kept under lock and key. But it's quite an interesting one. It almost looks like at the top of the stairs where you've got that clock. It looks like someone's run past that bit.
Okay.
Whether or not it is paranormal, I'm not too sure. But it's an interesting one.
I think some things are just best to put in inverted commas interesting, at least for now.
That's it, absolutely.
But
yeah.
The night I spent there, absolutely nothing happened. But I was actually invited up by a reasonably skeptical paranormal duo, and they were actually spending 2 nights there. And the second night, apparently there was very loud bangs coming from one particular room, and they are, I wouldn't say changed their belief pattern, but they certainly taking it a lot more seriously now. Of course, I chose me and my colleague Rosie O'Carroll, who came up with me, chose the wrong night.
Just curious as to what wall that was on. Was it an adjourning wall?
I'd have to ask Justin and Dale, actually. To be honest, as I say, that happened the night I wasn't there. So it's not something I've been through with a fine tooth comb, but it's actually, they actually did a very good write up in Haunted magazine a couple of months ago, actually. But off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you whether it was joining or not. But it was interesting watching how impressed they were when they communicated it to me afterwards, because they are certainly not on the James Vandy spectrum, but they are certainly, they want good solid evidence. So things do still happen there. What causes them to happen, I don't know, but I will fully agree with you. Having, my visit there was as much to spend a full day in the museum and the library as to spend the actual night there, because I wanted to actually check it happened, amongst other things. It did happen. There was enough press cuttings to show it happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And including the grandfather clock going down the stairs. But as for it being a black monk, you know what I was saying about in Transylvania, which I've been to 7. No.
Yeah, carry on.
What I was saying about Transylvania and how they identify their weird phenomena with vampires. What I would say about Pontefract, it's a town of 27,000 people. It's not that big. It's got two flattened monasteries, to be fair, but it had two very significant monasteries there.
Yeah.
It also had a hermitage, which was basically caves that hardcore monks stayed down, the ones that were too macho just to be normal monks. That was actually mentioned in Shakespeare. And so basically you've got a town which is steeped in monastical and ecclesiastical history.
Yeah.
So if you're going to get a ghost and a sighting, if you're going to get poltergeist activity combined with the sighting of a man in a long dressing gown, whatever, along something or another, what's the first thing that's going to come to mind if you live in a town that's steeped in ecclesiastical history like Pontefract?
Exactly.
It's you want to give these things a identity. Even if it is a 1950s council house, which before that was licorice fields in the middle of nowhere near the town centre, and certainly nowhere near where they hung monks who may have happened to have committed a rape, which is not on any records I could find.
Or me, to be fair. I couldn't find any either.
Oh, you had a good look as well, actually. Yeah.
I did have a good look, yeah. Anyway, on that note, we have actually come to the end of the first part of the show. If we're going to just take a quick break, please join us after the break when we continue a fascinating discussion all about cyclical phenomena and poltergeists. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm Kerry Greenaway, joined in the studio by Mr. Paul Rook and Richard Clements, and our guest today, Mr. John Frazer. Before the break, we were talking very extensively about poltergeist phenomena and where we thought it could be caused from, and various theories on this. And we actually were touching on the Black Monk of Pontefract. But coming off the back of that, we were saying that it could possibly be theory that paranormal teams going in are now actually creating that activity for themselves, it not actually being the original poltergeist, because it's well known, isn't it, John, that poltergeists only tend to last for a period of time.
Yes, probably not as sure. I mean the official guidance on the PSI Encyclopedia, which is part of the SPR website, quick plug, excellent encyclopedia, is that poltergeist cases are usually over in a few weeks. I think that's probably understating a little bit, but yes, poltergeist cases seem to happen for a reason, and yes, when the reason goes away, the poltergeist case tends to go away. And from what I remember, there's very little evidence of anything happening in Enfield once the Enfield family left, and I don't think there's much evidence of anything happening between about 1970 and when they in Pontefract, when the initial outbreak of phenomena stopped, up until after they released the movie about it and had the movie's premiere actually in the house itself.
Yeah. Competition winner,
so yes,
by the way.
It does seem to be triggered by a reason. But yes, it could well be, as we were discussing earlier, the expectations of something happening causing enough energy to make something happen.
So how much behind all of this belief system play into this?
I would hypothesize, and it's only a hypothesis, that it's you probably do need to have that trigger, which can be an expectation of something to happen, to summon off whatever energy needs to be summoned off. That is, of course, assuming poltergeists are indeed something supernatural, which we always need to put a proviso on because there has been a bit of trickery out there. But just putting that aside for 1 minute, yeah, I would think expectations are quite important. Now, expectations can also cause psychological experience of apparitional ghosts, which is why I tend to think they'll always make poor evidence of anything paranormal, because because on that side, I mean, it could be you've created something real by your expectation, but you've equally got the theory that it's just something you've imagined, unless things start flying around, in which case you lose the psychological theory.
Well, yeah, that certainly would blow that one out the water a little bit, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's only so far psychology can go.
That's true. Paul, have you
I would love to hear Chris French explain an actual poltergeist thing. I mean, you can do, but only by, if you're being reasonable, by trickery, which again does happen.
What I was quite interested in was something you touched on very briefly before the break. Geological factors, and has this actually been looked into as regards sort of suspected poltergeist cases? The Earth, sort of magnetic, or sort of just the general geology of the location. Has there been any work done on that?
There's been some, probably not enough. There was a chap called Lambert, who was a member of the Society for Psychical Research. I've mentioned the SPR Member in Transylvania now. In the 1950s, did quite a big survey and found that most poltergeist cases were within 3 miles of water. Probably more interesting, because I don't know how many places aren't within 3 miles of water, but the more interesting thing is that the more interesting point he made, I mean, the water bit could fit in with TC, all the work of TC Leatherbridge and, ghosts sort of appearing over water. But the more interesting point he did make, which is far more objective, and is that I think about off the top of my head, 2/3 or 3/4 started in the wet winter months. So put the two together, and somebody would have to do a little bit more work to check whether we're just talking main sources of water and what have you. But to put the two together, and you've got possible interesting triggers. And certainly anecdotally, there's quite a lot of poltergeist cases do seem to be near rivers or streams or what have you. And the other interesting thing is geological factors. Again, you can't statistically quantify it, but there's quite a few interesting cases that seem to possibly back that up. One of the most interesting being Langenhoe Church, which was investigated not by the SPR, but by the Peter Underwood of the Ghost Club.
Is that Colchester?
It's near Colchester, Langenhoe. Yes, it's the church was demolished in about 1960, but it was actually on the Colchester major. It was right in the middle of the Colchester earthquake of I can't remember, just before the beginning of the 20th century, and there's still a major fault there. It's I think probably number one likely place to have earthquakes again.
That'd be quite interesting, because you would think the cage is not 100 miles away from there either, is it?
It's not, actually. I don't think it's quite as... I mean, Langenhue had a little bit of damage done, actually, because of the earthquake. So you are talking about pretty near in its epicenter. That's the reason it had to be demolished. But it... I mean, Langenhue was haunted and had a lot of poltergeist experience, phenomena. Plus, the a house very close to it had a lot of strange things happening, including a naked female ghost suddenly appearing.
So whereabouts was this again exactly?
Sorry, you caught his interest now.
The address must stay fully confidential until I've fully investigated myself, and then.
Oh, okay. Considering you're more qualified and been to Transylvania, what, 7 times, is it?
But no,
I'm between Richard and John.
I think what I might do is write a blog on it. Incidentally, you can catch all our blogs on www.paranormalconcept.com.
Oh my God, we're plugging all over the place today, guys. Right,
well, I thought I'd get in while I could.
Let's get back to the phenomena and geological reasons where maybe that could happen.
Now, Langenhue Church, as I say, got demolished. Actually, it's a fascinating place because it's just still got the graveyard but no church, and it's just sort of covered. It's nobody looks after it. The actual house nearby, it's got a name. I can't remember. It's in the book, but I haven't been there since. So I have no idea if it's I mean, obviously, if it's a private residence, one should probably not. Not go there unannounced or try and give them a sense of what expectations or anything like that. So it's probably something that any responsible investigator shouldn't follow up on. But yes, it's there to be researched if it's researchable ethically, and to see if anything has happened since. Or if, like all these things, are just kind of, they have their time and their moment and the possible energy sources, and then die away.
What's your? There is a theory, again, another theory out there that poltergeist activity is linked to UFO sightings and activity. What's your take on that?
Now, funnily enough, I don't know much about UFO sightings, but ever since I've written this book, it's kind of an angle I've just been kind of building up to possibly explore, because I'm kind of thinking, if there's one box and for all these things that we consider paranormal, it's quite possible that I mean, some people still think UFOs are, aliens, physical aliens from another planet, but I suspect a lot of ufologists tend to be exploring other ideas as well. Now, I know in, believe it or not, Latin America again, a lot of the lights from the sky thing are kind of described far more in sort of paranormal terms, possibly harbingers of doom and that sort of thing, a bit like our black dogs. Are we going to get any barking? No, we didn't this time.
He sat up.
He missed his cue there, Kerry.
Yeah.
So funnily enough, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on it, but it'd be interesting to see how much. I mean, you have UFO hotspots. You've got you've certainly got paranormal, non-UFO paranormal hotspots, and it'd be certainly worth exploring whether they're all one and the same thing or not. But I wouldn't speculate, because maybe that would be another chapter 10 in the future.
Well, I looked into roughly, and it was a brief look at, to be fair. I didn't go too deep into it. But I tried to see if there was any strange, like ufology kind of sightings around the time of the Enfield haunting and the Pontefract haunting, to see if possibly there could be a link to these big cases. And I turned up a blank, but I will hold my hands up. I didn't go too deep down that rabbit hole because it was leading me off in a direction I wasn't overly interested in, to be fair. Ufology is not really my bag. And there are a plethora of theories in that field all by itself, let alone the paranormal field. You know, you talk theories, you can go around in circles on so many different theories. But it would have been interesting if that had been a thing as well, if you could find a link there somewhere.
Well, this is where I was sort of going with the geological thing, because I don't believe in like the nuts and bolts UFO theory, but I describe them as aerial phenomena, just unexplained, you know, but sort of earth lights and stuff, which has been sort of like associated with fault lines and things like that. So that sort of was the angle I was coming at it from.
Anybody? Paul?
Interesting. No, see, I was just thinking about what Richard was talking about with the obviously the geological aspects of it, and I think in a previous show we was talking about the stone tape theory and how, you know, that maybe some of the natural elements that are in the house, like for example the wood and maybe whatever the walls are made of and the floor and the ceiling, could all contribute.
Quite possible. I'm always intrigued as to whether the stone tape theory existed before the 1973 television program called The Stone Tape. I've never quite been able to find out one way or the other, actually.
No, I've not come across anything before that date.
Yeah.
But it like I said before on the previous show, that it's a kind of good theory, but I don't believe in the same way as we're talking in regards to poltergeist. You can't put it down to one factor. You have to look at multiple factors, and also the mechanics behind the stone tape theory of recording storage and playback. So you have to look at, although in a way it would possibly be see, I don't even think it would be easy to research that, because too many factors and too many, you know, we're talking about geological reasons as to why poltergeist activity might be the trigger. You know, that might be the trigger for poltergeist activity. It would have to be the same if you're looking at it for the stone tape theory phenomena. That's my perspective on that. But I kind of want to change tracks on this, because this poltergeist, before we go any further, John, give a plug out where people can get your book in advance of it being released on Amazon.
Well, it's available for pre-sale on Amazon, which means you can obviously book it, but it doesn't come until July. I do have a few review copies due to the fact that a few talks have been cancelled, and if anyone was particularly interested in purchasing a copy and possibly it's not compulsory to review it, to be honest, but I do have a few spare copies in my possession, which I would have to post on a bout of daily exercise in my jogging suit, dodging. No, but if anyone wanted to, should I give an email out here, or do you want to put it up on your web, or it's if anyone wants to email me, I'll give further details. Or alternatively, if anyone wants to got a particular point on the discussion that they want to add to specifically, my email address is jfrazer, that's J as in John, FRASER, ghost hunting. I would assume you all know how to spell that. So jfrazer ghost hunting at hotmail.co.uk.
we will share all the information where you can get a copy of the book release if you are interested. And obviously in these times we've got time on our hands to actually read and take in a bit more of a study into areas of the paranormal which we may not always have time for. We'll post all the details on our website, which is Paul?
www.paranormalconcept.com.
Well done. And on our Paranormal Concept Facebook page as well. And John is also on Facebook if you want to get hold of him that way. Now, before you went down this long rabbit hole of Poltergeist, you actually looked into and was trained in hypnotic regression. Now, this fascinates me.
Oh, yes. That was a whole millennium ago.
It might have been a long time ago, but it still fascinates me.
I was probably quite a small part of it. I was actually are you listeners aware of the organisation, the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena, better called ASAP?
Call it ASAP because we can never remember what each letter means.
Yeah, glad you remembered it.
It's always a test of how many pints you've had at a paranormal conference as to whether you can say it or not, I find. But not too long after that organisation was formed, they had a very effective hypnotic regression group, which they invited me to join. They had a expert hypnotist and they basically attempted to take people back to past lives. The best result they probably had was a chap from potentially called Cedric the Viking from the Battle of Hastings. No, Cedric the Saxon, sorry, from the Battle of Hastings. Lots of historical accuracies, but possible sources as to where the chap, who I think from memory was also a teacher, could have got them from. But they did also train me. They had me as a subject, and I, as I'm a psychic as a brick, and probably probably have as much ability to be as hypnotized as a brick as well. So they did actually train me in some hypnotic techniques, and which were quite interesting. And I hypnotized a few people under close supervision, of course, and it's quite an interesting insight into how the process works. I'd probably tend to, again, tentatively come out against past life theorizing, because having been in a light trance, as a subject, I can kind of see how there's a real desire to go along with it, but not without faking in any way. Just you've got this lovely voice asking questions, you want to answer them. Things come into your mind that kind of seem a little bit more real because you're in a light trance, and you come up with, I could nearly see the way the process might work in a deep trance, except you'd be absolutely unaware that the process was happening. But saying that, it's only a speculative. That's only a speculative conclusion, and there's very interesting. It's worth looking at. I don't know if it's just pre-internet, I think, but there's a lot of interesting research done on Cedric the Saxon, who may or may not have died in the Battle of Hastings.
Who should I say, came? I know you said you only went into a light trance. Who were you in an alleged previous life?
Oh, my God, I can't really remember actually. I don't. I don't think I came out with anything consistent, because I have no real memory of what I came out with. As I say, we are talking slightly last millennium here, so I didn't come out as anything meaningful. I think, I can't remember if they took me back below zero or they were just trying to get me to remember sort of childhood things and what have you. Which is also interesting, because obviously an entirely different thing. There's a lot of criminal discussion about whether you have retained memories or whether, again, it's just prompting people to, to come up with something with regards to possible criminality as well. So it's a really interesting area, and it did give me some insight into it. But just on balance, and it's a very speculative balance, just the way I saw the process working is kind of puts you in a position where you subconsciously want to give people something, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I can sort of see it from that perspective. Yeah, I can see it from that perspective.
Yeah, well, I sort of feel sort of like hypnotic regression. As for me, that's something I would decline to actually do, because I'm not really sort of big-headed or anything, but I think I know too much, sort of like historically wise, because I've got quite an interest in that sort of field. And, would I be just drawing on that, or would it be a genuine experience? I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of like, and for me, sort of, and I think people in general, you do retain a lot of information throughout life that you could possibly draw upon. I think that is quite underestimated, quite how much knowledge we do store throughout our sort of life. So, yeah, that's my sort of take on it.
I tend to agree, but there's one or two reasonably impressive cases, but probably not enough to kind of. I mean, if past life exists, we've all had one, and we'd want to have possibly more than one or two slightly impressive cases to sort of sway the balance of probability.
I think this is why a lot of the cases involving children, and they remember their past lives, are more impressive than, say, for example, an adult, because obviously the adult's had time to learn where the child hasn't.
Oh yeah, no, if you can get a case where the child accurately says where he was born, and somebody checks it up and there was a past person living there, no, that would be extremely good evidence.
It is a fascinating area. The hypnotistic side of things is an incredibly fascinating area, and even down to healing and people getting people to do things under hypnotic not necessarily regression, but the just being hypnotized it is a fascinating concept that somebody could have that kind of power, I suppose you would call it, over another person. Very simply, I mean, there are cases of people just touching somebody else, and they've done things which they would never have done normally, using air quotes.
The key I remember is probably only about 5 to 10% of people are hypnotic to that extent. And if you actually look at a stage hypnotist, what he usually does is some little game with the whole audience, and maybe says, put your hands together, they're stuck together with glue, and 90% of people will probably pull them apart, but the 10% that don't are the ones that go on the stage. So there's a lot of even if it's just pure psychology and the way the mind works, it's still fascinating, because we don't really fully understand that yet. So it's even if it's got a perfectly good rational explanation, it's kind of nearly paranormal, in the sense we don't really know how the brain normally works. So it's fascinating on either angle.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm going to change tacks again on you and cover another area, because believe it or not, we are already halfway through the second segment. You've done investigations. You've actually been out and done what we would class as paranormal investigations, haven't you? Back in the day.
Yes, I have been known to spend the night in a haunted location, or even a day.
What? Yes. Where would you think now? Do you do it now? Would you do it now?
I would do it as part of an experiment now, if there was something I particularly wanted to discover. I mean, it also depends what you mean by investigations. I mean, there's a big set piece investigations where 10 people spend the night in a famous haunted place and try and establish things. There's also occasionally, people have a quiet word that one or two strange things are happening in their house, and I would certainly, all ethical guidelines considered, yes, potentially visit that person, almost certainly with another person, and obviously talk to them and try and rationalise what might have happened. So, I mean, there's two entirely different types of investigation. I'd probably still do both in principle, but yeah, I think you need a particular scenario to make the big set piece investigation interesting once you've done quite a few of them. If there was some particular phenomena happening regularly in a particular spot and you maybe had a particular bit of equipment that could identify it, then it would probably be worth doing. But I think after a certain amount of investigations, going in randomly to a place just to see what happens, you kind of do that for a while and then maybe move on to other things.
I think that tends to be the trend, doesn't it, for people that are interested in cyclical phenomena or ghost hunting or whatever term you want to put on it, is that you get to a point and it's not enough going out on a spontaneous investigation or, a different location every time you go out. It becomes not enough because it doesn't give you the answers that you're looking for, because we're looking for answers. That's why you start down this road, right? Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So this is where organisations like the Society for Psychical Research come in, and they've looked into subjects in a lot more depth, or cases in a lot more depth, like the Enfield haunting that we've spoken about quite a lot today. So for the average ghost hunter, what can the SPR give? Is it intimidating for those people?
It's well, I wouldn't think it's intimidating unless you don't like people that have been to Transylvania. It's the SPR has. No, I don't know. I wouldn't say it's intimidating. We've actually now got like all organisations, including the Ghost Club, it's probably a little bit London centric. But no, I mean we've got meetings every couple of months on various subjects, various lectures. It's got a wonderful library. It's also got a wonderful online library of the journals going back to goodness knows when. Which you can search kind of alphabetically and get a whole, a whole source of knowledge. It's got quite an interesting conference, which has got people all ages attending. It's also got fairly good contacts, which probably makes it differ from most organisations, with the parapsychology research groups of the various universities, of which is about 8 or 9 that do take it seriously these days. In fact, our current president, Chris Rowe, is Professor of Psychology at Northampton University. Which gives an interesting overlap. And, we paranormal researchers could do with a little bit of academic rigor, and parapsychologists, I always say, need to get out of the laboratories a little bit more, which some of them do, to be fair. So it makes a good meeting point between the two, and it's probably the way we are actually going to progress things. If we do progress things, is we do need to get some academics a little bit more involved. So good for the ones that are.
Oh, totally agree with that.
Agree with that. Yeah.
There has been a time where it's been very almost like two completely separate entities. The academic side, with the ghost clubs and the SPRs and the ASAPs, and then the ghost hunting community that are going out and doing investigations, week after week after week. And it would be nice to try and pull the resource, as it were, to maybe push it forward a little bit further than it is. Is that how it's starting to feel within these organisations, do you think?
I think we're slowly getting there. I mean, I think we've probably come closer to being there in the past. I mean, in the 1930s, if you look at past presidents of the SPR, for example, I mean, turn of the century, we had a chap called Arthur Balfour, who then went on to become Prime Minister, and the thought of sort of Boris Johnson sitting at the back of a meeting. I mean, it just isn't going. Whether it's a good thought or not, it isn't going to happen at that level. So we came from eminent scientists and people taking it seriously to kind of going into a bit of backwaters. So I kind of hope we're kind of gradually coming out of that again. I mean, when the very first parapsychology unit was set up in Edinburgh in the 1980s, because Arthur Koestler died and basically bequeathed this to any university that would take it and fit the criteria. And to be honest, at the time, there wasn't actually, it's quite a lot of money, and there wasn't actually many takers, because most universities just sort of jumped a mile. So we've done quite well from coming from virtually one in the mid 1980s to 8 or 9 doing, at least taking the psychology of the paranormal quite seriously.
Paul?
So.
Sorry,
go on.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I'm just like a normal kind of girl that works in a shop and GCSE level, and sometimes it feels quite, I use the word intimidating, because you are dealing with a higher level of academic. You are dealing with universities and PhD people, and people that have got a lot more knowledge in regards to that side of things and how to do a study properly or how to research. But with people that are writing books like yourself now, and Cal Cooper and Steve Parsons and people like that, are bringing it down, and I don't mean this derogatory at all, but to a level that is more understandable. It's almost like layman terming it for people like me, who I can get a PhD thesis in front of me, and by the end of it go, what the heck is that about? Do you know what I mean? Because of the terminology. So, to bring it down to sort of like a level that anybody can pick up and run with, it is a fantastic resource.
I totally agree. I don't think spontaneous phenomena can be PhD'd in the sense that you can do tests on ESP and what have you, and then have all these statistical algorithms, which quite frankly I don't understand either. But I mean, paranormal investigation in the field is something that we need a rational mind for, and an inquiring mind, and certainly don't need a degree in any. I mean, it's good maybe to have people with electrical knowledge and things like that, but which I have no speciality in either. But no, I don't think I'd be unhappy if people that didn't have. I don't have a PhD, by the way. I'd be unhappy if people who didn't have PhDs but had the right inquiring mind and the right sort of healthy skepticism with a small s didn't get a lot out of the society. And as a council member, I'd want to know why, to be honest.
It is a fantastic resource of information, and if you just because I know it's based primarily in London. There is a hell of a lot that is put out on the internet as well, if you're a member. Like John has just said, there's the online library of the journals. There's also talks and everything that you can read, and you get some information sent through to you in the post. It's absolutely a phenomenal source of information that is at your fingertips. And everybody I've spoken to from the society has actually been really open to talk to me.
Of course.
Which I think some people in the normal paranormal field, the everyday paranormal field, may not necessarily feel is a resource to those. I urge people, look into it, look into the ASAPs, look into the ghost clubs, look into the SPR. There's a whole plethora resource of information and material out there that is not being utilised in the paranormal field in general at the moment, and needs to be.
Well, I think you're perfectly correct in what you've said there, Kerry, because it's becoming a time. I mean, the SPR, ASAP, and those organisations, they are sort of reaching out. They are sort of getting to a level they're feeling comfortable with, and it's up to people in the lower echelons of the paranormal sort of community and stuff to act. It's give and take, and they're going to have to step up. It's there. You just have to look at yourself and see, what am I in this for? If you just want to stay in it just to go out late at night and do that, fair enough, do it. But don't kid yourself any further, just keep it as that. But if you are generally serious in what you do and want to make a contribution, however small, you are going to have to sort of meet halfway.
Yeah. Paul?
Absolutely, you can't really add to that. Really, I'd second that sentiment totally. Definitely. I mean, that pretty much sums it up, really.
I mean, we're very lucky as podcasters. We get a chance to talk to people like John. We've spoken to Cal Cooper before. We've spoken to Terence Palmer. People like that. I've been very lucky that I've had access, and people have spoken to me. But every single person I've spoken to from these organisations, Steve Parsons, all these people, have been very personable and have so much knowledge, because they research in a way that's not generally done. It's a basic history research, go and do the paranormal investigation. That's it. That's as far as it generally goes.
It makes you think more outside the box, and you get into it a little bit more. And I like that sort of discussion, because you do pull out loads of different ideas and theories, and it progresses the way we investigate. I mean, I go out there investigating, but I still don't think I'm in that league, if that makes sense.
No, I'm nowhere near that kind of league.
It improves the way, just talking to these guys, it's improves the way I investigate, and come up with new theories of my own and progress with those as well.
It's just opening up good dialogue with the opposite sort of number and stuff, and actually talk to them, and perhaps, sort of ignore what's on Facebook. But a lot of people sort of do their paranormal investigation and discussion over Facebook, which is quite prevalent at the moment, and it's not getting anywhere.
It tends to be, if you share an opinion or a theory on social media, out come the pitchforks and the torches, and they hunt you down and play you left, right, and centre. And it's ridiculous. That's sort of why I've come away from that a bit.
There's too much paradrama. We need to raise that level, raise that bar, paradrama, right? And we need to raise that level, and that is something we can do by knowledge and research. What are your top tips for researching a paranormal case, John?
Believe nothing, question everything.
That's quite a good one, right? That's quite.
That works for me.
And don't necessarily discount personal experience and personal statements, witness statements, like you've spoke about before, from a barrister saying we take that in a court of law. Don't we?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, witness statements is, well, ghosts don't photograph well. I think we've come to that conclusion. We've got a handful of photographs that are possibly of something, possibly not. So certainly, if apparitional entities have any objectivity, the only way of at least edging towards that is through through multiple witness statements. I was a little bit flippant with them. No, they believe nothing, question everything. It's actually quite true. Like many years ago, I was in an investigation, a haunted house. It's one of these set piece ones organised by ASAP, and one of the investigators told me that noises are sometimes heard from the nearby shed, even though no animals are kept in there anymore. And did hear one or two noises, and we managed to get it unlocked, walked in, and there was a bunch of cows in there. I mean,
no animals in there at all.
Surprise, surprise.
You couldn't get a bigger animal if you tried.
it's I'm sure somebody had told that to him, and it wasn't a question of fraud or anything like that. But it's always worth fact checking. It's always worth reading. Trying to read about 3 different sources of the same thing, because then you can look for the commonality of it. Actually, in the book, without giving anything away, without having the budget to visit there, I actually came to some, again, very tentative conclusions of what I would call, very tentatively, the Amityville poltergeist, i.e. Amityville horror case. Mm-hmm. And actually, by reading between the lines a little bit of both the sort of testimony of the people and the testimony of the disbelievers, I actually found that quite possibly none of them were actually contradicting each other, but they were saying things in very different ways and coming to very different conclusions. And it might have been a minor poltergeist case, but they're actually accused of fraud, and I actually left thinking it possibly wasn't, because some of the things that they claimed are just so ridiculously mundane and written up in the book to sound a bit more less mundane. It was actually one of the worst frauds ever if they'd actually done it. So it's always worth getting things from a few sources, and probably the other tip, if possible, is to find the original source of a ghost story or a paranormal event or what have you, who wrote it up first, because it's so often been turned into sort of little snippets of Chinese whispers that if you can actually find the original source, it's absolutely fascinating to see where it comes from.
Yeah, the paranormal community does tend to sort of hang on to anecdotal sort of tales, don't they? Sort of, yeah, but to distill them down to the original source, I mean, well, that takes good research and investigation work. That's probably more important than the actual going out and looking for whatever it is you want to look for.
Yeah, and it's probably a lot easier to get a direct hit as well. I mean, actual paranormal investigating as opposed to research, very much like fishing, and it's quite often in a pool that's not that full of fish. There's probably a couple of big ones out there, but you have to wait and wait and wait.
That's it.
Very much so. It's not that easy, is it? Sometimes when you're researching something, you can, particularly these days with the internet, that's usually the first port of call for most people, is look it up on the internet, see what you can find, but finding original sources or regurgitated false information is prolific.
Oh, absolutely. So that's kind of my 3 roundabout tips. I think investigation is more about getting yourself in an inquiring state of mind, and then doing the donkey walk. I mean, probably the most fun I had was when I was having my little expeditions of looking into whether there was any fact behind some of the more whimsical ghost stories. I was researching cases of Lady Loverbond, which is supposed to appear every 50 years off the Goodwin Sands when it sank there in 1749. And I just went straight into my public library and said, can I have the Lloyd's list of wrecks 1700 to 1750, please? I suspect you'll have to get it in from somewhere, but here's my 60p for the interlibrary lending loan.
I like it.
It is a resource, is it? A local library is a resource, and it's not just the books they've got in. They will get books in for you or find the information for you. The same as your local records office. If we could, my local one is, I say local, it's not that local, but Chelmsford Records Office is probably the nearest to me. If I went there and asked them to pull something in from somewhere else, they will do that for you, or you get in touch with them online. There are resources out there that you don't have to visit the area to pull in the information, right?
Yeah, I suspect there's only about 10 copies of the 1700 to 1750. And I think they were a bit disappointed when I took it away from it's humongous. It's a lot of X between 1700 and 1750. I spent about, obviously, the story has a date in it. It's a Valentine's Day. You're starting to get the gist. It's an old smuggler's tale. But I looked through about a few weeks either way. Found absolutely nothing. Looked in alphabetical. End of ghost story. Of course, it couldn't exist anyway because the ghost story was a wedding party got run aground because of the jealous first mate who was really in love with the bride, and they all got killed. And so if they all got killed, who told the story in the first place? Lovely story though. It didn't stop about 600 ghost hunters being on Deal Beach or Deal pubs probably in Valentine's Day 1997. 98. Either way, I actually wanted to go down, but I couldn't get booked. The hotels were all full. Ghost hunters from all over the world. So put it in your diary.
That's brilliant. I love that.
2048, I think. So pencil it in. I think you're all still young enough. You can push my wheelchair.
Well, they might have to push mine as
well. Yeah, probably have to push mine as well.
So what's next for you, John? I mean, have you wrapped up on the Poltergeist for now and moved on to a different project, or are you still well and truly down that Poltergeist rabbit hole?
I'm to be honest, I'm doing at the moment I'm spending most of my time writing a few articles about the book and that sort of thing. No, if I was doing anything else, I think I probably would want to explore whether what I speculate could be one big box could be made even bigger by taking into a few more things. It was interesting that you mentioned UFOs and what have you. I mean, I kind of think if there's something science have missed, it's liable to only be like one or two things max, if you know what I mean. So I kind of think that if they have missed one or two, we're only talking about one or two boxes. So I'd be interested to see how many more things could potentially or not fit into this possible energy theory. But I haven't come. As I say, if I do write a book, I never write a chapter. My last two, I've only done 2 books, but there've just been 10 chapters, and I never actually have an idea what the chapter 10 is going to be, because it would kind of spoil the fun of kind of researching, if you know what I mean. So I don't know. Maybe I'll hit a dead end. Maybe I'll come out with a bright new theory. I don't know. Half the fun is trying and spending the and spending the nights and days in interesting places. Because even the old ghost stories, even if you have to find out that they're not based on much, it's damn fun finding that out as well.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Most definitely. What's your favourite ghost story that you've ever heard, John?
My most favourite ghost experience would be a I mean, most of the stories are quite short, grey ladies, black ladies, what have you. But my most favourite ghost experience was when I was just starting out, and I had this concept of a haunted house being in the middle of nowhere. It's not proper ghost hunting unless it's in the middle of nowhere. So actually, looked through all my
Yeah, so true.
It's going to be a stormy night as well.
Yeah.
So I looked at all my literature that I'd been reading for like a few years, and just joined ASAP about a year before that. And I also luckily had I used to be in European youth movements, and had a conference halfway up Scotland in European youth movement, and went and got a subsidised visit to that, and then continued driving up all the way to the north tip of Scotland to this haunted cottage called Sandwood Cottage, which is next to the most remote beach in England, about 3 miles away from the nearest road, and surrounded by peat bogs and shifting sands. So once you're there, it's just a ruin. Once you're there, you have to spend the night there. There's no way you could go back, especially after I left my torch on charge in the local restaurant.
Rookie error, everybody.
Yeah, schoolboy error there.
Not talking. And anyway, I spent the night there, and it was absolutely fascinating. It was like once I'd got over the initial spooked out factor of seeing disembodied white blobs floating on the hills, just to find out there were sheep at dusk. And once I got used to it, it was absolutely one of the most peaceful, blissful, most wonderful nights I've actually spent. Just the romance of doing it. I also did quite a good bit of research from that afterwards, and swapped notes with the author Peter Underwood, who the way I managed to join the Ghost Club at the time, because it was invitation only. But whether or not, I mean, people have seen the bearded sailor there. I've got my own theories about it, which I won't go into now. But so it's an interesting exercise. It's probably more an interesting personal experience. But sadly, it can't be done again, because in the mid-1990s, somebody nicked the roof off the ruined cottage. And now it really is getting towards just being a pile of bricks.
Oh.
So it just cannot be repeated. Well, I mean, you can camp there, but it's not quite the same. It did actually have a roof and a fireplace, and it was kind of a cottage then. But as to whether the bearded police sailor still visits, who knows?
Wow. We can't go and check, really, unless you want to spend the night in a tent, really, I suppose. On that note, yeah, that rules me out, definitely. I don't do tents. On that note, we've actually come to the end of the show. So I'd like to say thank you very, very much for joining us tonight, John. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if you'd like a copy of his book, don't forget, you can get in touch with John and listen to the earlier part of the show for where you can get that, or check out the Paranormal Concept website page, Paul.
Yeah, www.paranormalconcept.com,
where you can also find all of our blogs and all of our past shows as well. And we will also put the information up on the Paranormal Concept Facebook page. Thank you very much again, John. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure for me as well.
Yeah, great show. Loved it.
Mm-hmm. We hope you have enjoyed this more in-depth discussion about poltergeists. Please join us next week on the Paranormal Concept Show, whereas we haven't yet decided on a topic, but I'm sure we shall. You'll have to tune in to find out. On that note, we bid you a very farewell. Say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Bye. Bye.